She woke up to the soft sound of the morning birds outside her small window. The sun had just begun to peek over the horizon, casting a golden glow on the dusty floor of the tiny room she shared with her younger brother. The air was heavy, but she did not mind. She had long grown used to the smell of poverty, to the constant struggle of surviving in a world that did not make things easy for those born without wealth. Despite everything, she had a spirit that refused to break. Her heart, though small in her body, carried a resilience that amazed those few who knew her story. Her day began like every other, with chores that seemed endless. She quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her brother, who had been coughing through the night. She filled a small bucket with water from the shared well outside their home and carried it back, careful to avoid spilling any along the uneven path. Even at such a young age, she had learned the importance of balance and patience. The slightest mistake could mean wasted water, and every drop mattered in their tiny household. Breakfast was simpler: a slice of bread, some leftover porridge, and a few pieces of dried fruit her mother had managed to buy last week. She ate quickly, knowing that she had to get to the market early if she wanted to help her family earn enough for the day. Her mother had been sick for a few weeks now, and her father had passed when she was very young. Life had given her no choice but to grow up faster than any child should. As she stepped out of the small house, she felt the cool morning breeze on her face. The streets were already bustling with people heading to work or selling their goods. She nodded politely to the shopkeepers she passed, who often gave her a kind smile or a small piece of fruit for free. In return, she offered a warm smile and a respectful greeting. Despite her hardships, she never let bitterness cloud her heart. She believed that kindness, even in small amounts, could make the world a better place at the market. She joined other children and women selling vegetables, handmade crafts, or second-hand clothes. The noise was overwhelming: the shouting of vendors, the clatter of carts, the laughter of children, but she found comfort in it. This chaos was life, and life was something she had learned to navigate with determination. She set up her small stall, arranging the few items she had carefully. Each piece was important. Each piece represented the hard work and hope of a better day. As the morning passed, she noticed a group of older children laughing near the fountain. They were playing roughly, tossing stones into the water and shouting at each other. She kept her distance, not wanting trouble. But her attention was caught when she saw a small boy trip and fall, scraping his knee. Without thinking, she ran over to help him, offering a hand and a comforting smile. The boy looked up at her with tears in his eyes, and for a moment, she saw the innocence and trust that reminded her of herself as a younger child. She helped him to a nearby bench and cleaned his wound with the little cloth she always carried for emergencies. She bandaged it as best she could and offered him some water. The boy's mother soon arrived, thanking her profusely. Her heart felt light for the first time that morning. She liked helping others, even when her own life was filled with struggle. It reminded her that goodness could exist even in the harshest places. By midday, her stall had sold a few items, enough to help buy bread for the evening. She felt a small sense of pride in her contribution, knowing that her efforts mattered to her family. She waved goodbye to some friends she had made over time at the market. Even in poverty, there were bonds that could not be broken. These connections gave her strength, and she cherished them quietly. On her way home, she noticed a group of villagers gathered near the town square. Curiosity tugged at her, and she moved closer. An older woman was shouting, pointing at someone, and a crowd had formed around her. She tried to see what was happening, but the crowd was thick, and voices overlapped. She didn't recognize the person being accused at first, but then she realized the woman was shouting about a small theft that had happened earlier. The villagers were angry, and the tension was palpable. Her heart skipped a beat as she heard some whispers. They were talking about her, pointing fingers, murmuring that she had been seen near the shop where something had gone missing. She froze. She had never stolen anything in her life. She had always believed in honesty, in doing what was right, even when no one was watching. The accusations felt like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to speak, to protest, but the crowd was loud and no one would listen. The fear that had been a distant companion all her life now became overwhelming. Tears welled up in her eyes. But she forced herself to stay calm. She knew she had to think quickly. The shopkeeper, an older man who had always been kind to her, came forward. He squinted at her and frowned, but even he did not immediately defend her. The villager's anger was contagious, and even small doubts from those who usually supported her felt like betrayal. She remembered the small cloth she had used to help the boy earlier. She could not understand why the world now seemed so ready to believe in her guilt rather than her innocence. She tried to explain where she had been, what she had done, but her voice was drowned out by shouts and accusations. She felt small, insignificant, and trapped. The shame and confusion weighed heavily on her young shoulders. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the villagers began to disperse. Some still whispered, casting wary glances at her, while others shook their heads in judgment. She walked home slowly, feeling every step like a burden. Her heart was heavy, her mind racing with questions. Why would people believe something so false? How could a single moment, a misunderstanding, change the way everyone looked at her? When she reached home, her younger brother ran to her, sensing something was wrong. She knelt down and hugged him tightly, hiding her tears. She did not want him to see her fear, to feel the pain that had been unfairly thrown upon her. Her mother, weak and sick, noticed her distress immediately. She asked what had happened, and the girl tried to explain, but the words felt useless. How could she convey the weight of false accusations, the sting of betrayal, the loneliness of being judged unfairly? Dinner that evening was quiet. The bread tasted bland and the porridge was barely warm. She ate slowly, thinking about the day's events. She reflected on her life, the endless chores, the struggles, the moments of kindness, and now the sharp pain of false judgment. She felt a mixture of sadness and determination. She could not let this define her. She could not allow the cruelty of misunderstanding to break her spirit. As night fell, she sat by the small window in her room, looking at the stars. She wondered about fairness, about how the world could be so harsh to those who had done nothing wrong. Yet in the quiet of the night, she also felt a flicker of hope. She remembered the boy she had helped, the smiles she had shared, the few moments of joy and connection. Those were real. Those were proof that goodness could survive. Even in a world that often seemed cruel, she whispered a promise to herself that she would not give up, that she would find a way to prove her innocence, and that she would continue to be kind despite the pain. Her eyes, though heavy with tears, shone with determination. She did not know what the next day would bring, but she knew she would face it. She was young, but her spirit was strong. And though the path ahead was uncertain and filled with challenges, she was ready to walk it with courage. Holding on to the hope that truth and kindness would ultimately prevail, the morning after the market incident, she woke with a heavy feeling in her chest. The previous day's whispers still echoed in her mind, and though the sun shone brightly, it could not warm the cold fear that had settled over her. Her little brother was already awake, rubbing his eyes and yawning, and she forced herself to smile, hiding the storm brewing inside. She needed to be strong for him. If she allowed her fear to show, he might begin to feel the same hopelessness she did. She went through her morning chores quietly, fetching water, sweeping the floor, and preparing the meager breakfast. The usual clatter of the small household felt deafening today. Every sound seemed sharper, every movement heavier. She thought about the villagers' eyes on her, their silent accusations hanging over her like a dark cloud. How could she explain herself when no one seemed willing to listen? After breakfast, she decided to go to the market again, thinking that keeping her routine might make the world seem a little less cruel. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and stepped outside. The streets were familiar, yet now they seemed intimidating. People she passed looked at her differently, whispering or glancing in judgment. Some faces were cold, others curious, but none were kind. She felt her stomach tighten with every step. At the market, she tried to carry on as usual. She arranged her small stall, greeting neighbors with her quiet, polite smile. Yet the weight of suspicion hung over her. Vendors who used to greet her warmly now kept their distance. A few children she often played with stared at her with caution. Even small acts of kindness from strangers felt strained, like the world itself was unsure whether she was innocent or guilty. She tried to focus on her work, selling a few vegetables and handmade items. Every coin she earned felt hard-won, but it did little to lift the heavy feeling in her heart. She kept thinking about the shop where the theft had occurred. She remembered exactly where she had been and what she had been doing. She had done nothing wrong, yet the whispers persisted. Her thoughts twisted in a mix of fear, anger, and sadness. She did not understand why people could believe lies so easily. Mid-morning, a group of villagers gathered near the fountain again. Her stomach sank as she approached. She recognized some of the same faces from yesterday, and their eyes, filled with suspicion, met hers. She slowed her steps, unsure whether to continue or to hide. But hiding would only make things worse. She had to face it, even if it was terrifying. Suddenly, someone shouted her name. The voice was harsh and angry, echoing through the crowded square. She froze. The man pointing at her was the shopkeeper, his face twisted with frustration. He accused her of stealing a small amount of money from his store the previous day. Panic surged through her veins. She opened her mouth, trying to defend herself, but the crowd's murmurs swallowed her words. No one was listening. No one wanted to hear her side. Fear gripped her, and her legs trembled beneath her. She could see the shock and judgment in the eyes of people who had once smiled at her. A few children she knew whispered behind their hands, their curiosity turning into suspicion. Her chest tightened as the reality settled in. Her innocence did not matter here. What mattered was the accusation. It was spreading like wildfire. The villagers began to gather around her, some raising voices, others shaking heads. She felt trapped, surrounded by anger and disbelief. She tried to explain where she had been, recounting the day in detail, but the words stumbled out, trembling and weak. The crowd only grew louder. Her heart pounded as tears pricked her eyes. She felt a sharp sting of unfairness. How could her word, her truth, hold no weight against suspicion and rumor? A kind neighbor, an older woman who often helped her mother, stepped forward, trying to calm the crowd. She spoke softly, reminding everyone that accusations needed proof that the girl had always been honest and hardworking. But her words were like a small stone tossed into a roaring river. The anger and suspicion of the villagers were too strong. Some voices grew louder, drowning out the older woman. Others shook their heads, refusing to believe anyone who defended the girl. The crowd's judgment felt like a wall pressing down on her, and she struggled to breathe under the weight of it. She glanced around for a familiar face, someone she could trust, but even the few who might have supported her looked hesitant. Fear had spread like wildfire, and suddenly she was utterly alone. The realization cut deeper than any words could, a sharp pain in her chest. She was innocent, yet here she stood, accused, humiliated, and powerless. Her mind raced for a solution, for a way to convince people that she had done nothing wrong. But every plea seemed to bounce off invisible walls. It's unheard and dismissed. The shopkeeper continued his accusations, his voice rising with anger. He described the missing money and the circumstances, his words painting a picture that did not include her truth. She tried to speak again, but fear and panic choked her. Her voice came out in a whisper, trembling and barely audible. The crowd's impatience grew. Some started to shout, some turned away in disgust. She felt the sting of betrayal in the eyes of people who had once been friendly. Their trust shattered by a single misunderstanding. Tears began to fall freely, running down her cheeks as she struggled to hold herself together. Her pride, her sense of dignity, felt like it was slipping away. She hated feeling small, hated the helplessness that clung to her like a shadow. She thought of her mother, weak and sick at home, and her younger brother, who relied on her for protection and guidance. She could not let them see her like this. She had to be strong, even when it seemed impossible. Finally, the crowd began to disperse, their whispers following her like ghosts. The shopkeeper left, satisfied that his accusations had made an impact. Some villagers shook their heads, others muttered warnings, and a few avoided her gaze entirely. She walked home slowly, her heart heavy, tears still wet on her cheeks. Every step felt like a struggle. Every breath, a reminder of the injustice she faced. When she arrived home, her brother ran to her immediately, sensing her distress. She hugged him tightly, hiding her face in his small shoulder. Her mother, noticing the sorrow in her eyes, asked gently what had happened. She tried to explain, but the words felt inadequate. How could she convey the pain of being falsely accused of having her integrity questioned when she had done nothing wrong? Dinner was quiet, the small family sitting together in silence. She ate slowly, her mind replaying the morning's events over and over. She felt anger, sadness, and a deep sense of injustice. How could a simple misunderstanding turn into cruelty? How could people so easily believe in wrongdoing without proof? The weight of these questions pressed down on her, making it hard to focus on even the simplest tasks. Later that evening, she sat by the small window in her room, staring at the darkening sky. The stars blinked gently, indifferent to her pain. She thought about what had happened and what might happen next. Fear still lingered, but so did a quiet determination. She would not allow false accusations to define her. She would find a way to show the truth, even if the world seemed unwilling to see it. She remembered the small boy she had helped at the market, the smiles she had shared, the moments of kindness that had filled her days with light. Those moments were real, and they reminded her that goodness still existed, even when others failed to recognize it. She whispered a promise to herself that she would endure, that she would not allow this cruel twist of fate to break her spirit as the night grew darker. She finally lay down, hugging her brother close. Sleep came slowly, her mind still racing with thoughts of the day. She dreamed of a world where truth mattered, where innocence was protected, and where her small acts of kindness could shine brighter than the shadows of accusation. Though she did not know how long the struggle would last, she knew that she would face it head-on, with courage and determination. Holding on to hope even in the face of cruelty, the next morning, she woke with a sense of dread that weighed heavily on her chest. The events of the previous day had left a mark not only on her spirit, but also on her sense of safety. She went through her morning routine quietly, careful not to disturb her younger brother or alert their weak mother to the turmoil brewing inside her. She carried water, cleaned the small room, and prepared the simple breakfast with mechanical movements. Each action heavy with unspoken fear. She knew that the villagers' judgment had not disappeared overnight. The whispers, the stares, the distrust, all of it lingered, invisible but suffocating. Even the small children she passed on the way to the market looked at her with suspicion rather than the usual innocent curiosity. Every glance felt like a reminder of the unfairness she had endured, and she wished she could disappear into the cracks of the dusty streets. Unseen and unnoticed, at the market, things felt tense. From the moment she arrived, vendors who had once been kind avoided her, shaking their heads or muttering under their breath. A few children who had once played near her stall now stared at her from a distance, unsure whether to approach. Her small collection of goods felt heavier in her hands as she arranged them on the table. Each piece carried the weight of her family's survival, yet no one seemed willing to acknowledge the effort behind it. The villagers' judgment had seeped into every corner of her world by mid-morning. The crowd began to gather again, murmuring and pointing. This time, their anger seemed more intense, more deliberate. The shopkeeper who had accused her the previous day appeared again, accompanied by a few men from the village. Their expressions were stern, their eyes searching for any sign of guilt on her face. She stood frozen, heart pounding, unsure if she could face them. She wanted to run, to escape. But there was nowhere to hide. One of the men stepped forward and demanded that she be punished for the alleged theft. Their words were harsh, loud, and meant to intimidate. She shook her head desperately, trying to explain that she had done nothing wrong. But the crowd had grown restless, eager for action rather than truth. Fear wrapped around her like chains, and for the first time, she realized that innocence might not protect her from cruelty. Her mother's words from the night before echoed in her mind. Be strong. Even when the world is cruel. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the moment felt impossible. The villagers' anger was overwhelming, and their judgment seemed final. The shopkeeper accused her loudly, recounting details that were twisted from the truth. And the crowd gasped, as if she had confessed without a word. She could feel the humiliation pressing down on her, a weight that made it hard to breathe. Suddenly, a few villagers began to shout instructions. Some suggested a public punishment. a way to shame her so that others would learn from her supposed wrongdoing. Her heart sank. She had seen punishments in the village before, and the thought of being subjected to one filled her with terror. She tried to speak, to explain that she had been wrongly accused, but her voice faltered, swallowed by the chaos. The crowd's impatience grew, and she realized that her innocence mattered little compared to the spectacle they craved. A group of older villagers approached her and grabbed her arms, leading her toward a small clearing near the town square. She struggled, but their grip was firm. Panic surged through her veins. Her stomach twisted with fear, and tears streamed down her cheeks. The crowd followed, jeering and whispering, some with anger, some with morbid curiosity. She felt naked in her vulnerability, exposed to the judgment of people who had once been neighbors and friends. The punishment was simple, but cruel. She was made to stand in the center of the clearing while the villagers shouted accusations and warnings. Some threw small stones nearby, not to hurt her physically, but to intimidate and humiliate. Her hands trembled, and she hugged herself instinctively, trying to make herself smaller, to disappear. She could hear her mother calling her name from a distance, her weak voice filled with worry and helplessness. Her younger brother clung to their mother, crying softly. Unsure of what was happening, despite the fear, she tried to remain calm. She told herself that this too would pass, that the truth would eventually come out. But the hours dragged on, each moment stretching endlessly as the villagers' voices rose and fell around her. She was accused of things she had never done, mocked for her poverty, and treated as if her very existence were a crime. The humiliation was crushing. But she clung to the belief that her innocence was stronger than their cruelty. Finally, the older woman who had spoken for her before stepped forward again. She tried to reason with the crowd, reminding them that punishments should not be based on suspicion alone, that children and young girls deserved fairness. Some villagers began to murmur in agreement, though many remained skeptical. The shopkeeper grumbled, clearly displeased, but he could not fully dismiss the woman's words. Slowly, the crowd began to thin, leaving her standing in the clearing. Trembling and exhausted, she walked home slowly, each step heavy with fatigue and lingering shame. Her mother met her at the doorstep, wrapping her arms around her daughter and whispering words of comfort. Her younger brother clung to her side, and for a moment, the world outside felt a little less cruel. Yet she knew that the damage had been done. The villagers' suspicion had not disappeared, and the humiliation would linger. Her spirit had been tested, and though it had not broken, it carried the weight of the day's cruelty. That evening, she sat by the small window, staring at the darkening sky. The stars blinked softly above, indifferent to the suffering below. She thought about her life, the endless chores, the struggles, and now the harsh punishment she had endured for something she had not done. Her heart ached with sadness, but she also felt a quiet resolve growing within her. She could not let this define her. She had to survive to prove her innocence, and to continue living with dignity. Her mother brought her a small bowl of porridge, and she ate quietly, savoring the warmth more than the taste. Her younger brother leaned against her, seeking comfort, and she felt a flicker of strength in her chest. She realized that for them, she had to keep going, to fight against the injustice, and to hold on to hope. She whispered to herself that tomorrow would be different, that she would find a way to show the truth, and that she would not allow cruelty to take away her spirit. As night fell, she lay down on the small mat, hugging her brother close. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of fairness and justice, of a world where truth mattered and innocence was protected. Though the journey ahead seemed daunting, she felt a spark of courage. She knew that despite the punishment and public humiliation, she could endure. She could survive, and she would not let the cruelty of others define who she was. She was young, yet her heart carried a strength far greater than the fear that surrounded her. And though the night was long and filled with sorrow, she held on to the hope that morning would bring a chance for truth to be seen, for kindness to be recognized, and for her life to begin to heal from the pain she had endured. The morning after the punishment, she woke with a sense of determination that she had not felt before. The fear and humiliation of the previous day still lingered, but she refused to let it define her. She had to do something, anything, to prove her innocence. For her younger brother, for her mother, and for herself. She could not allow the false accusation to shape her life. She began her day with the usual chores. But this time, her mind was focused not on the fear around her, but on the plan she needed to make. She needed evidence, witnesses, or anyone who could help her show that she had not committed the theft. Every small step felt heavy, yet necessary. She carried water, swept the floor, and prepared the simple breakfast with a resolve that made her seem older than her years. Her mother noticed her quiet determination but said nothing. Sensing that her daughter was beginning a journey she had to take on her own. As she stepped outside, the streets of the village seemed just as harsh as before, yet she walked with a quiet strength. The whispers still followed her, the suspicious glances still pierced her heart, but she refused to let them shake her resolve. She knew that if she did nothing, the accusation would continue to shadow her every move. She had to act, and she had to act carefully. Her first stop was the market, where the theft had supposedly occurred. She needed to talk to anyone who might have seen her or noticed the real culprit. She approached vendors, old neighbors, and anyone who would listen. Carefully asking questions without causing more suspicion, many shook their heads, unwilling to get involved, fearing the crowd's anger or the wrath of the shopkeeper. Her heart sank with every refusal, but she did not give up. She had learned that persistence was the key to survival. Hours passed, and her efforts seemed futile. She began to lose hope when an older woman, one of the few who had always been kind to her mother, called her over. The woman had seen something the previous day that might help the girl. She explained that she had noticed someone else near the shop at the time of the theft, someone acting suspiciously. The woman's words were like a small spark in a dark room, giving her a glimmer of hope. She thanked the woman quietly, her heart pounding with renewed determination. Armed with this new lead, she sought out the person who might have witnessed the truth more directly. It was a timid young boy who often ran errands for the shopkeeper. She approached him slowly, speaking gently, careful not to frighten him. She explained that she had been falsely accused and that he had seen who the real culprit was. The boy hesitated, nervous about the villager's anger. But she reassured him that telling the truth was important and that she needed his help. After a long pause, he finally nodded and agreed to speak up. Together, they went to the shopkeeper and the older woman who had supported her. She explained calmly, recounting the events as accurately as she could, while the boy confirmed her version. The shopkeeper listened, frowning, his hands on his hips. The villagers who had gathered to watch the confrontation murmured among themselves, some skeptical, some curious. Her voice trembled at first, but she found strength in telling the truth, and finally being able to share her side of the story. The shopkeeper examined the evidence and the boy's testimony carefully. After a long moment of silence, he began to see the cracks in the accusation. The real sequence of events became clear, and he had no choice but to acknowledge that the girl had been falsely accused. Relief flooded her heart, yet it was mixed with the lingering pain of the ordeal she had endured. She had survived the humiliation and punishment, but the memory of it remained sharp. Word spread quickly through the village. Some villagers were skeptical, unwilling to accept that they had judged her unfairly. Others began to murmur apologies, realizing that their suspicion had caused unnecessary pain. She received cautious smiles from a few neighbors who had doubted the accusations. Though small, these gestures were meaningful. A reminder that truth, once uncovered, could begin to heal even the deepest wounds. Throughout the day, she continued to talk to those who had witnessed the events, carefully piecing together a timeline that would clear her name completely. She remained calm and composed, refusing to be intimidated by the lingering whispers of doubt. Every conversation strengthened her, showing her that perseverance and courage could begin to turn the tide of public opinion. Her mother watched from the doorway, tears glistening in her eyes. She had worried for her daughter, had feared that the false accusations would crush her spirit. But now she saw the resilience, the bravery, and the quiet strength that had carried her through the darkest hours. Her younger brother clung to her hand. Sensing the shift in the atmosphere, and for the first time in days, they both felt a small sense of safety and relief. As evening approached, the villagers who had spread the rumors began to retract their harsh words. Some apologized quietly, while others simply looked away, embarrassed by their earlier behavior. She accepted the apologies with quiet dignity, refusing to let anger cloud her heart. She had endured cruelty, punishment, and humiliation, and yet she remained kind, patient, and determined. This, she realized, was her true strength. That night, she sat by the window, looking at the stars above. The events of the day replayed in her mind, not just the fear and pain, but also the courage, the support she had received, and the triumph of truth. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Knowing that she had taken the first steps toward reclaiming her dignity and clearing her name, the journey was not over. But the path ahead seemed a little less dark. She whispered to herself that she would continue to fight for fairness, not just for herself, but for others who might face injustice in the future. She had learned that standing up for the truth required courage, persistence, and patience. Though the scars of the false accusation would remain, she now carried a quiet confidence that no cruelty could erase as she lay down to rest. Hugging her younger brother close, she felt a warmth in her heart that had been absent for days. The journey toward vindication had begun, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew that she could face it with courage. Truth, she realized, was a powerful force, and with it, she could survive even the darkest moments. Sleep came gently, carrying dreams of fairness, hope, and the strength to continue fighting for what was right. The morning was calm, but she felt a strange mixture of nervousness and hope in her chest. Today could change everything. She had spent the past days gathering evidence, speaking to witnesses, and piecing together the truth. Her determination had not wavered, and now, with the support of those who had seen what really happened, she was ready to face the villagers and clear her name once and for all. She began her day like any other, performing her morning chores with quiet efficiency, but each action felt heavier, charged with the anticipation of what was to come. Her younger brother watched her, sensing that something important was happening, and she offered him a small, reassuring smile. Her mother, weak but alert, observed her from the doorway, a mix of worry and pride in her eyes. She did not speak much, knowing that her daughter needed her strength more than her words. As she walked to the village square, the familiar streets now seemed different. The fear that had shadowed her before was still there, but it was mingled with a growing sense of courage. People were already gathering, curious about what would happen next. The shopkeeper, the center of the accusation, was there, along with the older woman who had supported her and a few villagers who had been skeptical. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her gaze steady. She began to speak, recounting the events of the days that had led to the accusation. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of sincerity. She told them exactly where she had been, what she had done, and how the real culprit had acted. The boy who had witnessed the events stood beside her, confirming every detail she spoke. The crowd grew silent, listening closely. Their whispers had stopped, replaced by a tense anticipation. The shopkeeper frowned, clearly struggling to accept what he was hearing. He had been convinced of her guilt, and the revelation that he had been wrong unsettled him. He looked around at the villagers, many of whom were nodding slowly, beginning to understand that the accusations had been false. A few people muttered apologies quietly to one another, realizing how quickly they had judged without knowing the full truth. Some villagers, who had been harsh and unforgiving before, began to step forward. They spoke quietly, acknowledging their mistakes, admitting that they had spread rumors and doubted her without cause. The girl listened without anger. She had expected some hostility, but she chose to accept their apologies with quiet dignity. Her goal was not to punish those who had wronged her, but to show them the power of truth and integrity. The older woman who had supported her spoke to the crowd, emphasizing the importance of fairness and the dangers of jumping to conclusions. She reminded everyone that the girl had always been honest and hard-working, and that judging her without evidence had caused unnecessary pain. The villagers murmured their agreement, some lowering their heads in shame, while others looked at her with newfound respect. The shopkeeper finally spoke, his voice quieter and more measured than before. He admitted that he had been mistaken and apologized for accusing her. His words, though brief, carried weight, as he was a respected figure in the village. The acknowledgement of his error brought a sense of relief that washed over her like a gentle wave. The crowd's tension eased, and a few villagers offered small gestures of support, nods, smiles, and quiet words of encouragement. She felt a surge of emotion, a mix of relief, pride, and lingering sadness. The ordeal had been difficult, and the memory of the punishment and humiliation still lingered. But the truth had finally come to light, and her name had been cleared. She realized that the journey had not just been about proving her innocence, but about showing resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up for what was right. Throughout the day, she continued to talk to villagers, answering questions and clarifying details. She remained composed, refusing to let anger or bitterness enter her words. Her calm and honesty gradually influenced those around her, helping them see the situation from her perspective. Slowly, the community began to accept her again, though some still looked at her with caution. It would take time for full trust to return. The first steps had been taken. Her mother watched with tears in her eyes, proud of her daughter's strength and determination. Her younger brother hugged her tightly, whispering that he was glad she was safe. For the first time in many days, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that the worst of the ordeal was behind her. She had faced fear, humiliation, and doubt, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. As evening approached, she walked home slowly, the sun casting long shadows on the village streets. The air felt lighter, the whispers gentler, and the stares less harsh. She realized that vindication was not just about proving others wrong. It was about reclaiming her own sense of dignity and self-worth. She had survived, and she had shown that courage and truth could overcome even the harshest circumstances. That night, she sat by the window, looking at the stars above. Her thoughts drifted to the events of the past days, the fear, the punishment, the struggle to prove herself. And finally, the moment when truth prevailed. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had faced injustice head-on and emerged with her spirit intact. She whispered a promise to herself that she would continue to live with honesty, kindness, and courage. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she hugged her younger brother close as she prepared for sleep. Feeling a warmth and security that had been absent for days, the journey was not over, but the hardest part had been faced. She knew that life would continue to test her, but she also knew that she possessed the strength to endure and the courage to face whatever came next. The stars outside seemed to twinkle with approval, and she closed her eyes with a sense of hope and quiet triumph, ready to embrace the future with a heart unbroken by cruelty. The days that followed her vindication were quieter, but they were filled with a new kind of energy, a subtle hope that had been absent for so long. The villagers who had doubted her began to treat her with cautious respect. Some whispered apologies still, while others offered small gestures of kindness, helping her carry goods, greeting her warmly, or sharing a smile. It was a delicate balance, rebuilding trust, but she approached it with patience and quiet determination. She knew it would take time, but she was ready for it. Her family life, though still modest and filled with daily struggles, felt lighter. Her mother's smile returned more icily, and her younger brother seemed happier, less burdened by the constant tension that had shadowed their lives. They began to share moments of laughter, small victories over daily hardships, and the simple joy of being together without the fear that had plagued them. The home, though small, became a sanctuary once more, a place where love and hope could thrive despite the lingering memories of injustice. She continued her routine at the market, but now she walked with a quiet confidence. People noticed the change. Vendors who had once avoided her now nodded in recognition, offering encouragement rather than suspicion. Some children approached her without hesitation, asking for help with their small tasks or simply for a friendly smile. Her efforts to rebuild her place in the village were gradual but steady. Every small interaction reminded her that the world could be kind. Even after cruelty had touched her life, though her name had been cleared, the memory of false accusations and public punishment lingered. She often thought about the sharp sting of betrayal, the isolation, and the fear she had endured. Yet she refused to let those memories dominate her future. Instead, she used them as reminders of her resilience, proof that she could survive hardship and emerge stronger. She understood that life would always present challenges, but she also knew that she had the inner strength to face them without losing herself. In the evenings, she would sit by the small window, looking at the stars and reflecting on the lessons she had learned. She realized that kindness and honesty were not always immediately rewarded, but they were powerful tools for navigating life. She had seen firsthand how fear and rumor could distort reality. Yet she had also experienced the relief and healing that truth could bring. These reflections gave her a deeper understanding of the world and her place within it. Her resolve extended beyond herself. She began helping other children and families in the village, quietly offering support where she could. Sometimes it was a piece of bread, a helping hand with chores, or simply a comforting word. These acts of kindness were small, but they carried meaning. She understood that her own experience of false accusation had made her more empathetic, more aware of the struggles others faced. She wanted to be a source of light in a world that had once seemed overwhelmingly dark. School, which had once felt like an impossible dream, became a renewed hope for her. She attended whenever she could, determined to learn and grow despite the hardships. The teachers, who had been wary of her before, began to see her dedication and honesty, offering guidance and encouragement. Her studies were challenging, but she approached them with the same patience and determination she had used to prove her innocence. Each lesson, each moment of learning, felt like a step toward a brighter future. Her friends, those who had remained loyal and those who had slowly returned, became an important part of her healing. They shared laughter, stories, and small adventures, helping her rebuild the trust and connection that had been fractured by the false accusations. These friendships reminded her that even after betrayal, relationships could heal and people could grow beyond their mistakes. The bonds she formed were strengthened by shared experiences, empathy, and the recognition of each other's struggles. Over time, she became a quiet symbol in the village, a reminder that innocence and resilience could overcome understanding and cruelty. People began to speak of her courage and the way she had handled the accusations with dignity. Some younger children looked up to her, inspired by her ability to stand strong in the face of adversity. This recognition, though subtle, was deeply meaningful. It showed her that her suffering had not been in vain, and that her perseverance could inspire others to act with integrity and courage. The bond within her family grew stronger. Her mother, though still fragile, found comfort in her daughter's strength. And her younger brother thrived in the safety of a more stable home environment. Together, they faced life's challenges with renewed hope. They celebrated small victories, shared quiet moments of joy, and supported one another in ways that had been impossible during the time of fear and accusation. The home became a place of resilience, love, and learning. As months passed, she began to dream more boldly about her future. She imagined a life where she could continue to help her family, pursue her education, and make a difference in the lives of others. The lessons of the past, the cruelty she had endured, the fear she had overcome, the courage she had found shaped her vision of who she wanted to be. She understood that life would always hold challenges, but she also knew that her spirit, honed through hardship, could face them with strength and wisdom. The village itself began to change in subtle ways. People were more cautious about spreading rumors, more thoughtful in their judgments, and more willing to support one another. The impact of her story rippled quietly, teaching lessons of fairness, empathy, and resilience. She had endured suffering, but she had also created a small, lasting influence on her community. Her courage and determination became a quiet testament to the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit. Even in quiet moments, she continued to reflect on the journey she had endured. She acknowledged the pain and fear she had felt, the tears that had fallen, the moments of doubt that had challenged her resolve. Yet she also recognized the growth, the strength, and the understanding she had gained. Life had tested her, but she had emerged with her dignity intact, her heart open, and her spirit unbroken as she prepared for sleep each night. She held her younger brother close and whispered a promise to continue living with honesty, kindness, and courage, and to face each day with hope. She understood that life's path would not always be easy, but she had learned that resilience, truth, and compassion could guide her through even the darkest times. The stars outside her window seemed to twinkle in quiet approval, a gentle reminder that even after pain, there was always hope. With a heart full of determination and a mind focused on the future, she closed her eyes, ready to embrace the days ahead. She had survived false accusations, public humiliation, and fear, but she had also learned the power of truth, the importance of integrity, and the strength of her own spirit. Her story, once filled with pain, had transformed into one of hope, resilience, and quiet inspiration. And in that transformation, she found the true meaning of courage, healing, and the promise of a better tomorrow.